She doesn't deserve a seat. The fork in my hand froze midair. My father's voice boomed across the long dining table, silencing the chatter, stiffening the smiles. He shoved his chair back and marched toward me, eyes blazing, jaw clenched. Then, in one humiliating motion, he gripped the back of my chair and dragged it away from the table with a screeching sound that made every single guest turn. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I stumbled up to my feet, breath catching, face flushing, barely holding back tears, but not of sadness, of rage. She brings shame to our name, he barked, looking around at our polished, gossipy relatives for approval. And he got it. They clapped. Some laughed. My Aunt Maureen raised her wine glass like it was a toast. No one stood for me. No one told him to stop. I looked around the room. Every face wore the same smug smirk that had haunted me for years. Every voice that once whispered behind my back was now proud to insult me to my face. I was the girl who married too fast, left home too soon, spoke too little, but dreamed too big. In their eyes, that was unforgivable. I stood there in silence for a beat, just long enough for my hands to stop shaking. Then I fixed my hair, smoothed my dress, took a slow, deliberate step forward, and said in a clear, calm voice, "I hope you're comfortable in my house." Their laughter faltered. "What?" my cousin Josh muttered, looking around like he'd missed a joke. Then the double doors opened, and in walked my husband, all 6'3" of him. Sharp black suit. One hand holding a folded set of papers, the other wrapped protectively around my waist as he reached me. The room was dead silent. "Good evening," he said with that steady, low voice that had once negotiated billion-dollar deals. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. He looked at my father, then at every single person who just clapped when I was humiliated. I see the welcome was festive. No one answered. He unfolded the papers and set them gently on the table where my father once sat. "These are the updated property deeds. Effective as of last week," he said, pressing a signature with his thumb. "This estate, including the house, the land, and everything in it, now legally belongs to my wife." His eyes turned to me, to her. My father blinked, confused. You can't be serious." "Serious enough that if she asks me to clear this room, I will." Not a threat. A promise. I stood straighter, breathing in slowly, heart thudding against my chest like a drumline. Every pair of eyes that had once looked down on me now struggled to make contact. "You threw me out of this seat like it was trash," I said softly. "But turns out, you're the guest here." Aunt Maureen's wine glass trembled. She set it down. Cousin Josh cleared his throat. No one moved. My husband turned to me. "Do you want them to leave?" I looked at my father, at the man who once told me I'd never make it without this family, who called me a failure for not following his path, for loving someone he deemed beneath us, who never cared about my voice, only how I made him look. "No," I said, curling my lip into the faintest smile. "Let them stay. Let them eat. Let them pretend everything's fine in my house." My husband nodded and stepped behind me as I walked to the table.
And sat down.
Back in my chair. They watched like statues, speechless, stunned, struggling to process what just happened. I picked up my fork, took a bite of the salad I'd barely touched before the outburst, and chewed slowly. "Don't let it get cold," I said without looking up. But I didn't need to look. They were already too frozen to eat. The dinner continued, but not in the way they had planned. Every clink of a glass, every scrape of a knife across a plate was swallowed by the awkward silence that followed my words. I could feel the discomfort crawling under their skin, like ants beneath their fake smiles. My father sat 2 chairs away now, stiff and humiliated, glaring at his untouched plate as if the food had personally betrayed him. He hadn't said a word since I reclaimed my seat. Across the table, Aunt Maureen, the self-declared queen of the family, forced a chuckle. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order," she said, voice dripping with condescension. Buying your childhood home, that's quite ambitious. I met her eyes. No, Maureen. What's ambitious is thinking you can walk through someone else's house and still look down on them. The smile froze on her lips. Next to her, my cousin Josh stared at the deed papers like he expected them to vanish if he blinked. His father, Uncle Dennis, finally spoke up. Well, blood is blood, he muttered. No matter who signs the paperwork. Tell that to the eviction notice we found in the upstairs drawer, my husband replied, folding his arms calmly. Did you think we wouldn't see it? You were planning to sell this place behind everyone's back. You just didn't think she mattered enough to include. I turned to Uncle Dennis. Were you going to let them throw me out again? He glanced down at his plate, jaw tight. I didn't know about that. Liar. My hands clenched under the table, nails pressing into my palm. The betrayal didn't surprise me. It never did. But the confirmation still burned. This wasn't just about a dinner or a house. It was about years of being cast aside, overlooked, made to feel like a stain on their precious family name. I didn't fit their mold. I didn't wear pearls or pretend to enjoy their fake charity events. I married a man who grew up in a trailer park and built himself up with nothing but grit and sleepless nights. That was enough for them to call me lost. But tonight, the only thing they were losing was control. I stood up slowly and tapped my glass. I'd like to make a toast, I said. The clinking stopped. To family. The ones who stand behind you, not the ones who stand on you. To love, the kind that doesn't care about bloodlines or birthrights. And to truth, because lies only work when no one dares speak. I raised the glass. And to this house, my house. May no one ever again forget whose table they sit at. I drank, calmly,
Coldly.
while their faces fell one by one. My husband slid a velvet envelope across the table toward my father. What's this? He barked, not touching it. An offer.
For you to leave tonight.
The paperwork is clean. We bought out your shares. You're no longer tied to this estate. And the car outside is waiting. You think you can just erase me? He growled. I looked him in the eye. You did that all by yourself. He stood, but my husband was faster. Calm but firm. He stepped between us, holding his hand out. You want to scream?
Do it outside.
This house no longer tolerates men who tear women down to feel big. My father stared at him, trembling. You're just a glorified contractor. No, my husband said, stepping closer. I'm the man who lifted your daughter up after you pushed her down. And unlike you, I know what she's worth. For a split second, I thought my father might strike him. But then he looked around. No one backed him. No one clapped this time. Not even Maureen. Not even Dennis. Because they all knew what I knew now, he had lost. And I hadn't just won a house. I had won back my voice. He stormed out. The door slammed. The car engine started. And just like that, the man who once sat at the head of the table was gone. I stood there, my hands steady, breath even. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being unloved. I was done begging for crumbs from people who never saw me as whole. My husband stepped beside me. You good? I nodded.
But inside?
I was just getting started. The silence that followed my father's exit was thick, like fog inside a glass cage. Everyone could breathe, but no one dared. My relatives sat frozen, utensils limp in their hands, eyes darting toward each other, waiting for someone to speak first. No one did, except me. I turned toward Aunt Maureen, whose cherry lipstick had started to crack along the corners. Funny, I said gently. You've always had so much to say about me, about my clothes, my career, my husband. But now that you're sitting in my dining room, on my chairs, eating at my table, you're suddenly very quiet. She swallowed hard, her hand tightening around her wine glass. This doesn't change who you are, dear. You're right, I replied calmly. It just changes who you thought I was. Josh leaned back in his chair, trying to blend into the wallpaper. Look, I had nothing to do with the eviction letter. Oh, come on. I cut in, raising an eyebrow. You were the one who slid it into the old drawer in the upstairs study, weren't you? You and your dad made the call, signed the papers, and figured I wouldn't find out until it was too late. Josh stammered. I didn't think you'd be involved. That's the problem, I said, turning my gaze to each one of them. You all spent so long thinking I'd stay small, that I'd stay quiet, that I'd stay grateful for scraps. No one dared interrupt. Let me remind you, I said slowly, stepping around the table. I left this house with 2 duffel bags and a cracked cell phone. No car.
No job.
No family willing to take me in. I stopped behind Uncle Dennis. But I built everything I have today, without a cent from any of you. And now, I picked up the envelope on the table and held it up. Your guests in the home you once told me I didn't belong in. Dennis looked away. Tell me again, I whispered, how blood is thicker than water. My husband walked up beside me, placing a gentle hand on my back as a reminder. Breathe. I did.
Slowly.
Let's go, I said to him. They know where the door is when dinner's done. But then a quiet voice piped up from the far end of the table. It was my younger cousin, Ella. She stood awkwardly, barely 20, long dark hair tucked behind her ears, still in college and always too shy to speak over the adults. I'm sorry, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her, surprised. I didn't clap, she added quickly, eyes darting around. I didn't laugh. I always admired you. You got out. You chased something. You made something. Tears glimmered in her eyes. I just wanted you to know you weren't alone. My chest tightened. That was the moment I realized. Someone had been watching me. Maybe not to mock. Maybe not to sabotage. But to learn. I stepped toward her, my voice softening. Ella, thank you. That means more than you know. She wiped her eyes and smiled through it. They don't scare me anymore. Behind her, her father, my Uncle David, opened his mouth to object, but she cut him off. You never stood up for her, she said. And you won't stop me from doing it now. The room shifted. A tiny spark. A shift in power. A glimpse of what could happen when someone dared to break the cycle. My husband smiled at me. You started something, he whispered. I nodded. I did. And now I'm going to finish it. The next morning, the fallout began. By 8 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop, texts from relatives who had suddenly remembered they knew how to apologize. Half-hearted messages like, didn't mean for things to go that far last night, or, we were just following your father's lead. And my personal favorite from Aunt Maureen. Family fights are normal. Let's not let success get in the way of forgiveness. I read them in silence, letting the messages pile up like dust. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I pulled back the curtains of the master bedroom and watched the morning sun filter through the glass, spreading gold across the garden I used to stare at as a little girl, longing to escape it. Now it was mine. I stood in that quiet triumph for a moment before heading downstairs, where my husband was pouring coffee at the kitchen island. He looked up and smiled softly. Sleep okay? Better than I ever have in this house, I said, sliding onto a stool. I dreamed your dad was locked out in the rain and couldn't figure out how the gate worked. I snorted. You think he even knows how to use an intercom? He chuckled and passed me a mug. So, what now? I stared down at the steam rising from the cup, my mind already racing. I'm hosting a family brunch. He blinked. You're what? Today. 11 o'clock sharp. Everyone who clapped last night is invited. Are you planning to poison them? He joked. Tempting, I muttered. But no. I want them to see what respect looks like. I want them to choke on kindness. He smiled slowly. You're going to serve justice on porcelain. I'm going to serve it with mimosas. By 11:03 a.m., the dining room was full again, reluctantly. They came dressed up, pretending last night didn't exist. Maureen wore a pink cashmere coat. Josh shook my husband's hand too many times, and even Uncle Dennis brought flowers like this was some kind of Mother's Day visit. But their eyes nervous, like they were waiting for another shoe to drop. I stood at the head of the table, hands folded. Welcome back, I said, voice even. We appreciate the invitation, Maureen said tightly, like she had swallowed glass. I figured if we were going to have a proper meal together, it should be on my terms this time. A few exchanged glances. I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to throw anyone out. Not yet. Maureen raised an eyebrow. I just want each of you to understand something. I continued. This house doesn't belong to a little girl you could bully anymore. It doesn't belong to the family patriarch who played king for decades. It belongs to someone you tried to erase. And now, I gestured toward the window. This property, this legacy, is being turned into a women's shelter. Gasps erupted around the table. Josh nearly dropped his fork. Wait, what? I've partnered with a foundation. We're converting the guest wings and east side into housing for women and children escaping abuse. You can't do that, Dennis barked. Yes, I can, I said calmly. I own it. Every brick. Every nail. And I'm putting it to better use than a family that never used it for anything but ego. My husband stepped beside me and handed out the official paperwork, blueprints, permits, partnership letters. My lawyer had already signed off. This is outrageous, Maureen snapped. You're making this public? You want our neighbors to know what's happening here? I want everyone to know, I replied. Because what's happening here is good. And unlike what used to happen under this roof, it's something we can be proud of. They stared at me, eyes wide, lips parted, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, they hadn't just lost control of the house. They'd lost the illusion of their importance. And I hadn't just survived them. I'd outgrown them. The transformation began the very next week. Construction crews arrived early, tearing down rotted pergolas, replacing windows, and repainting walls that had for too long absorbed the venom of a broken family. Every echo of past humiliation was scrubbed clean with primer and purpose. My once quiet phone now rang for another reason: news outlets. The story had reached the local paper. Heiress turns childhood estate into safe haven for women. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need the spotlight. The work spoke louder than I ever could. But one morning, as I supervised the setup of the new children's playroom in what used to be the old wine cellar, I got an unexpected visitor. Ella. She stood at the front gate, backpack slung over one shoulder, trembling. I left, she said when I opened the door. Left. My dad. My mom. The whole mess. I told them I couldn't stay in that house anymore, not after how they acted. They told me I'd regret it. I stepped aside without hesitation. Then you're exactly where you need to be. She broke into tears and hugged me, like a little sister who had finally found her home. I offered her a place on the new staff team.
Paid. Dignified.
She said yes without even blinking. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just revenge. It was redemption. For every girl who sat quietly while her family crushed her spirit. For every woman who was told she didn't belong in her own home.
For me.
A month later, the house officially reopened. Where once there were whispers and wine, now echoed children's laughter. Where my father once gave orders, volunteers now gave comfort. And where I once felt like a ghost, I now stood like the foundation. I stood on the lawn that spring afternoon, wearing jeans, a simple blouse, clipboard in hand, hair pinned up, not as the outcast, but as the architect of a new legacy. My husband walked up behind me, his arm wrapping around my waist. You okay? He asked softly. I'm better than okay, I whispered, eyes misting. I finally feel real. He kissed my temple. You didn't just take back your seat at the table. You rebuilt the whole damn table. And he was right. Because every single person who once tore me down, every scoff, every insult, every time they dragged my chair away, they didn't break me. They built me. Stronger. Sharper.
Kinder.
I didn't burn bridges. I built a house so powerful, the bridge they thought they had could no longer reach me. And now I sit, not at their table, but at mine, surrounded by real family, by purpose, and by a kind of peace that no applause or title can buy. This time, the only seat anyone needs is one earned by love. And that's the kind I never plan to take away from anyone again.